Welcome to Highlighted, a Life Church midweek podcast. Here, we're on a journey to look for ways to make our sermons more practical in our everyday lives, and we want to inspire you to live out your faith every single day, not just on Sundays. In each episode, we highlight our sermons and our ministries to see how God is working in our church and through our community. And as always, not always, but as most times, and as my favorite times, I'm joined with the second greatest, the greatest pastor in the world. Pastor Joshua, and we're back you're back in the helm, you know,
right?
You missed a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And I was honestly worried that we were going to be at church for like 5 or 6 hours on Sunday. I was like, oh no, this man hasn't gotten up and preached in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And even that time, you wanted to keep going, and there was so much to unpack. And I'm like, I should have packed a lunch. And I should have came prepared, but man, what a great way to jump back in to our sermon. And I've talked about this for the past couple of weeks when you didn't preach, that the 2 sermons we took a break away from the series also kind of fit into our series in such a way of just living a kingdom-minded life and knowing that we are trying to live a life not that others envy, right? We want to live a life that is representative of Jesus. And doing that should grab the attention of others and should make them want to live that life as well. And man, I think, of all of the sermons we could have had in the break, I think those were 2 great sermons to have. So if you missed those sermons, if you missed week 1 of our series, or if you missed this past Sunday, go check it out. Right now, it's available wherever you listen to podcasts. It's also available on our YouTube channel, on our website. But let's dig into this week 2 of living the life they want.
It's crazy to me that we can take this just a couple of verses, and it can be so in depth. And Jesus is like, he's really just kind of starting out, right? He's just giving this is like his first big kind of dissertation almost that he's giving. And he starts off by saying, blessed. Blessed are those who, and I think that should draw our attention. All of us want to be blessed, right? I mean, we were gone a couple of weeks, and one of those weeks we were in Nashville, and touring a school for Malachi, and gosh, it's crazy. By the way, I just can't believe that. But here we are, and we had to stop by a Walmart while we were there. And we're walking in, and we're talking about, like, we've toured, we've done the first day of the tour, and we're talking about the price of college and all this stuff. And I look down, and there's a dime, and I'm like, come on, Jesus. Yeah, we're already paying for college. As it kind of joking in one hand, but on the other hand thinking, okay, God, like, thanks for the dime, but I'm going to need something bigger.
A lot more dimes.
Yeah, I'm going to need a lot more dimes. And so I was really challenged by that thought. And then we get back into this series, and it occurs to me that Jesus is like, look, this life is a blessed life. We don't always think of it in that way. We don't always stop and think, gosh, if I know Christ, I live such a blessed life. Even in the hardship, even in the hard things, the bad things, the terrible things, I'm so blessed. And there's so much to unpack in these little statements that feel somewhat incoherent, but they all flow together in ways that it's just incredible. And so for this week, we talked about this idea of blessed are those who are poor in spirit. It's hard to think about being blessed and being poor at the same time. And so you got to dig in and say, what does Jesus really mean here? And here's what he's saying. Blessed are the people who depend on me. For those people who understand that spiritually they're bankrupt, right? Because that bankruptcy means that they have to depend on me. And I thought, God, if I could ever truly come to that place, right, truly, and I know, like, oh, I'm the pastor, I'm supposed to have all this down and ready and set to go. But the reality is that most of the messages, and I say this all the time, most of the messages I preach as much for me as I do anyone else. And I was just really challenged by this idea that I can live that out, and by living that out, I will be blessed. By remembering that my life has to not be independent of him, but independence on him. And it's a small little space, right, in between those words, in and dependent. But we live in a world that values being independent. We want to do our own thing. We want to, again, just because this is the season of life that I'm in, like, Malachi's super excited. He can't wait. He can't wait to be independent, even though he has quite a lot of independence here. And he's going to miss us. He's going to miss, Roanoke and Life Church and all the things that are happening and all the things that are going on. And definitely Paul, 100%.
I hope.
But yeah, but he's super excited because that is what that's the idea that we push, right? Go be independent, go be yourself, go do your thing, go do what God's called you to do. And I love all that. But while you're doing that, you may not have to be dependent on me, but be dependent on God. In fact, I don't want you to be dependent on me. I want you to be dependent on him. And so we can all live that out, right? And this is what Jesus is talking about. And then he couples that with, those blessed are those who mourn. And this is where I really want to dig deeper today in the podcast, is this idea of mourning over sin. It in many ways, sin does not break our heart anymore. Sin ought to be gut-wrenching for us when we do it, by the way, and for other people that we know are in sin. It ought to be a gut punch when we know that somebody's living in sin. Right? And our first response out of that, God, I can't do anything to get them out of that, but you can. And now all of a sudden we've connected these two Beatitudes. And by the way, spoiler alert, the third one connects to the first two also. And so that was the challenge for me as I was reading through this. Like, okay, I know that I have to live dependent on him, but even beyond that, I have to depend on him for other people. I'm not going to change somebody's heart. We had a pastor here for a long time. He's repeated over and over and over again to me that's a heart problem, and only the Holy Spirit can fix a heart problem. And it's a challenge because I'm a fixer, right? I'm the type of person who wants to be like, okay, what can we do to get this taken care of? And that's not really my role. And so Jesus says, blessed are those who are poor in spirit, who know they have to depend on me. Blessed are those who mourn over this idea, this concept, this thing that is this disease that is killing people for eternity, and that's sin.
Yeah, and I just think just like week one, just like these past 2 weeks of being out of the series, it's a really simple concept.
Yeah.
It's a really elementary, really foundational to our faith to know these things and to believe these things. But sometimes we just get so caught up in life and so caught up with the distractions that, I have bills to pay. I have a family to provide for. I have this, I have that. I have a job that I have to go do. I have kids I have to feed. I have to teach them. And you begin to juggle all these things, and we kind of just put our head down and grind. And the NBA season just started. I've been watching a lot of basketball. Marissa got me NBA League Pass for our anniversary, so I can watch all the games. So she's kind of probably sad that I spend too much time watching all the games now.
She'll never buy that for you again.
Yeah, but I've been watching a lot of basketball, and you got to put your head down and drive in, and you gotta be aggressive and get to the rim, and you got to score, because it's easy to score closer to the basket than it is to just jack up 3-pointers from 30, 40 feet away, which is a harder shot because you're farther away. And it's easy math to know that if I'm closer to the trash can, all of my trash is going to go into the trash can than if I'm trying to sit at the back of the classroom and throw the paper ball in the trash can. And I just had this picture of just this big 6'5" guy, super athletic, just head down driving. And we do that.
Yeah.
But we have a coach, right? We have a God that's saying, hey, don't put your head down and look at your problems and just try to bury it all and do it all on your own, but depend on me.
Yeah.
Right. And, basketball is a team sport, right? If it was just 5 guys on the floor, just head down, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
But when we start to put our head up, and you can see who's open. You can see who can come and help you. You can see who can come and maybe say, hey, I'm not going to score this basket. You're still going to score, but I'm going to come over alongside of you and help you. And man, if we would just live our life in dependence, not independent. That was right. So write that down, because he just said that, and I was like, wow. Did he say that Sunday?
I did.
I missed it Sunday.
I did. I said it like 3 times on Sunday. Just saying.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But man,
okay.
write it down. Write it down, because that is good, and it's just such a practical thing. It's such a hard thing to let go of, because it takes a lot of selflessness.
Yeah.
To say, hey, I don't have to do it on my own. And I don't have to be the one to drive in head down carrying all the burdens.
Well, it connects back to margins of faith. If you're joining us, this is one of your first podcasts to listen to with us. You can go back and listen. We had a sermon series called Margins of Faith, and it was this idea about creating space so that God can use us and work through us, and all these things that having margins in our life bring. That little space between in and dependence, right? It's huge, because it forces me to slow down and realize that I can be dependent on God. Right, I can live in dependence of Him, on Him, instead of being independent of Him. And so having that space to breathe just for a second, and like a pause, like this little pause, it brings us back to that, like creating this space where God can use us and speak to and through us. And in this case, can take these small little, almost anecdotal sayings, right? I mean, the Beatitudes aren't anecdotal sayings, but they feel that way when we read them in Scripture. Like they could stand alone, or they could be one long discourse, and say, okay, there's got to be application here in my life. And I love also that we started this off by saying not only does Jesus give these things, but He gives them to a diverse crowd. We're going to dig into that a little further this week with the upcoming sermon, because they would have all heard this one very differently, this beatitude. And so these things that we're talking about, they're interconnected, right? This idea of creating space and leaving those moments, because we do find ourselves putting our head down and just digging in and driving. And then when we come into worship, we come in to hear the word, we don't slow down enough to actually hear it. At least I don't. I mean, I find myself, when we were gone, we were at a church, and I found myself thinking about all of the church things, right? I'm looking around the building thinking, man, that's a really good idea. Well, I'm not sure I would do this, or I like the way they handled this, or, I found myself kind of like analyzing.
Like dissecting it, like exactly. A science experiment.
Right. And realizing, like, about halfway through the sermon, oh my gosh, I just spent half of this sermon dissecting these things and trying to figure these things out, and God probably wants to say something to me from His Word today. And by the way, that probably means He always wants to speak to me, even when I don't know what He wants to say, even when I'm not able to just draw it out very quickly. His Word ought to always speak to us, no matter who's preaching, no matter who's teaching, no matter how good or bad you think it is, no matter what. And so I had to like physically stop looking around as pastor and tune in as disciple. Right, and in that moment, there was some incredible things that he was bringing out and that this guy was preaching about. Also, it helped that he had a really cool accent. But that being said, we don't always slow down enough to do that. We're thinking about what's next. We're always looking at what's happening next, what's happening tomorrow, what's my week look like, what's going on, and that's commendable. But Jesus is calling us, literally, he's telling His disciples, slow down, because I want you to live this blessed life. I want you to live a life that's blessed. All of us want to live a life that's blessed. But we have to slow down and take these moments, hear what Jesus is saying. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those people who depend on me, because I'm going to be there for them, because they're going to get what they need. Blessed are those who mourn, because they'll be comforted. What person that's in mourning doesn't want to be comforted? We all do. And so Jesus is making a point here to say, like, look, these things are important for you to live this type of life, so that other people will look and say, you know what? They depend so much on that God, and He always comes through, right? It's not their bank account that comes through. It's not their parents that come through for them. It's God. And when we live that way, it shows people this lifestyle that is counterculture. It changes the way they view things. The problem is many of us in the church, myself included, find ourselves not living out those blessed attitudes, those things that challenge us and change us and can change those around us. This whole series is about the influence that I have on the people around me. The name
and those people are different than the people I have around me,
absolutely,
or that you have around you, or anyone that we could look at in our church, in our family. We all have different blood family. We all have different jobs. We all have different communities that we live in and we're a part of. And yeah, we call this place home, and we all somewhat live near each other because we're all able to come meet together in the same place. But there's this stark contrast of people that might not ever walk into a church.
Right.
They might not ever listen to Pastor Joshua, but they might listen to Joshua, who's at the grocery store in front of them.
Yeah.
And they might not ever want to hear anything you say on a Sunday morning.
Right.
But if you can speak into their life and they could think back, man, what does he have?
Yeah.
What does he have that makes him stand out? Why is he so positive? Why is he so joyful? Why is he so giving? Why is he so loving?
Yeah.
And connect that to, oh, that's not Joshua. That's Jesus inside of Joshua.
And if you think people aren't thinking like that, they are. I mean, just as an example, you never know how your attitude is impacting someone else's. A couple of months ago, I shared a story about being in Kroger and having to go back to the pharmacy multiple times because the medicine wasn't ready. And like everything inside of me wanted to be that guy that was like, listen, I've been here and I'm starting to get upset, and you're going to tell me to wait again. This is ridiculous. Like going off, right? And I say it very calmly right now because I don't want to yell into the microphone. If I was preaching, I'd be yelling. And so but the reality is that actually doesn't help me live the blessed life. And it's never going to help the other person live the blessed life. Right? We had Fall Festival this week, and it was an incredible event. And the team that put that together did a great job. I'm super proud of everybody who played a part in that and did their part in that. But as the lead pastor, I get to kind of pick my job, which is cool because I got to drive the tractor. I love driving the tractor. It also means that I get to hang out and talk to pretty much everybody because almost everybody who comes is going to do the tractor ride. And so I get a few seconds just to talk with people, not as Pastor Joshua, right? But as the guy driving the tractor. And some people need me to talk to them as Pastor Joshua. I don't have a problem with that. I'm good with that. But also, like, I'm more than just the job I do to support my priesthood. I'm a priest. We all are. And so for me, like you're a worship leader, and your worship leading supports your priesthood. I'm a pastor. My pastoring supports my priesthood. You might be a doctor or a nurse, or maybe maybe you're a teacher, or you work at a daycare, or one of these other, maybe you drive a truck. You do that to support your priesthood. And so I get to, in that moment, not just be Pastor Joshua. I get in that moment to be somebody who depends on God to say the right words, to depend on God to pay attention to the Holy Spirit trying to tell me something about someone, or discern that somebody's going through a hard time. And so these moments can't be lost on us, but we have to depend on God. We have to live a life of complete dependence. When we think of dependence, we automatically think of things like, okay, well, I can depend on God for money and for housing and for clothing and all these other things, but it's so much more than that. When we get to the place where we understand we can depend on God to lead us to the people that we need to be in contact with because they need Jesus, right? That's what honestly, like, I want so much to be led to the people that need Jesus, but I don't know who those people are. Holy Spirit does. Right? And he can lead and guide me. So this is so much more than just living a blessed materialistic life. It's living a blessed spiritual life, living in true joy. I said this on Sunday, but that word blessed, it gives this connotation of constant love, constant joy, constant peace. And so when you look at somebody who's going through something super hard, and we know our fair share of people who go through hard things and who are going through hard things, and they can still turn their eyes towards Jesus, right? They're literally rolling down a mountainside spiritually and emotionally, and yet at every turn they're looking up, saying, "Okay, God, I can endure this because you're with me, and I trust you." It's such a challenge, but it's what we're called to. That blessed life is this constant love that Jesus brings, and we can't just write it off. It becomes important. It's a simple message. It seems like something somewhat elementary for those who maybe been around the church for a while. It's one of the first things Jesus kind of preaches and teaches about, yet it has such value. And then he follows that up with this idea to kind of to kind of show how we do this. He says, don't worry about tomorrow. Right? Today's got enough worries. Don't worry at all. Right? Like you're dressed pretty nice today.
Thank
right?
you.
Right? You got a little style going on. I could probably learn a couple things from you, but it is what it is. And here's what God says. Why are you worried about your clothes? And I'm not saying you are. I'm just, His word says, why are we worried about it? Why are you worried about what you're going to wear? Look at the flowers. You're dressed sharp, but you're not a flower sharp. I mean, it just is what it is. We look at flowers and we admire that. And we look at the fields and we think, oh my gosh, right? Like, how beautiful is that? And God looks at us and says, that's exactly how I see you. Depend on me. Depend on me for your clothes, for your food. Right? Depend on me when you feel lost. Depend on me when things aren't going the way that you think they should go. Depend on me when things are going great. Depend on me when somebody else needs something and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, not to take away from this week, but that just leads me back to last week and this idea of giving. And last week on Highlighted, we had a very special guest, the Pendel director of Speed the Light, who's a really good friend of mine, Pastor Luke Yoder. And, he said something really similar. And it was cool that you preached about it on Sunday. And, he said so many times we talk about God being our provider. We talk about Jehovah Jireh, but we don't actually believe it. And we don't actually live out our lives in a way that would say, no, I know that God dresses the lilies, right? He clothes them with beauty and splendor. How much more does He love me? How much more does He care about me? How much more is He looking out for me? And we say that Jehovah is our provider, but we don't live like it.
Right.
We don't make decisions like it, and we don't put our faith to the test like it. And, that comes to that when we give. It comes to that when we depend on God, because it's all about faithfulness.
Yeah.
Right? It's all about putting our complete faith, our complete trust in Jesus, who's always faithful, right? This whole sermon series, everything can be summed up that it's all about the faithfulness of God and who He is. And to know that God is faithful when I'm depending on Him. God is faithful when I should be depending on Him, but I'm not. God is faithful when I don't know what the next answer is. God is faithful when I think I know what the next answer is. And God is faithful through it all. And no matter what we walk through, no matter where we've been, no matter what situations and struggles and just busyness comes up, our God is faithful. And He's never failed to be faithful.
Yeah.
So I just think, man, like you said, what a simple but so complex thing.
Yeah.
And it's so simple, and we say it, man, we depend on God. Yeah, we need God, but we don't live like it. And we don't walk around our schools or our jobs or our neighborhoods like it. And we don't have conversations like we do. But if we would just let go of some of our pride, if we would just let go of the decisions that feel like are all up to us, and if we would just give it to God, just imagine what He could do.
Yeah, it's allowing Him and putting Him in, it's you restoring Him to the throne of your life, right? So as I was prepping the sermon, I went to you and I said, hey, there's this song that says this. You knew immediately what it was. And I was like, hey, we want to sing that at the end. And it repeats a few times, come take your place. And what a cry of our heart it would be if we would really say to God, come take your place. Right? He's going to do that one day for all eternity for the universe. But I also need Him to do it right here in my life. And so that idea of God's faithfulness, it follows all the way through to that He's going to do that if we let Him. He's going to take His place, and He's going to be our Lord, be our King, and He will take care of these things. We can depend on Him. And this theme is going to continue because we're doing one beatitude this week, and it's blessed are the meek or the humble, for they will inherit the earth. What
a prize,
right?
Of everything to win and inherit.
Yeah, and so just as a sneak peek, when you think about that and you kind of dig through that a little bit, that's a weird thing for Him to say to inherit. Like, I don't know, I kind of look around the earth, and on the one hand, I think, all right, it's nice, but I kind of want something different, like it'd be nice to
let me inherit heaven, God. Like, why are you giving me this garbage?
And it has this like present and future connotation to it, but in the present, it's a reminder that when we are humble, when we keep ourselves in the right place and him in the right place and others in the right place, right, that he will provide for our needs, right? There's nothing on earth that he won't provide for. There's nothing in eternity that he won't provide for if I will live out this life. And so, not to give away, but like we're going to continue that theme, and hopefully you've already kind of picked up on these things. Like when we do sermon series, a lot of the messages sound similar and sound in ways they have the same kind of thrust and push that is challenging us, but it's because sometimes we need to hear things more than once. And so Jesus, like all these different people, he's saying, here's the blessed life, here's the blessed life, here's the blessed life. And now he's saying to us, here's the blessed life, right? Live poor in spirit. Depend on me for everything, right? Depend on me depend on me when it seems like you can't depend on anyone else. And and look at the world and look at your life and mourn sin. It's such a challenge. And I would say that if you were here Sunday or you weren't here Sunday and you're thinking through this and I would challenge you to look at your life and say, okay, is there an area where you are not Lord?
Yeah. And like that's what we said at the end. And we had a conversation today even about that. Just like, man, none of us could ever say that we've made him Lord in every facet of our lives and every way of our lives, because we haven't reached eternity yet and we're still human. We're still sinful at our core.
Yeah.
Right? We were born into sin. There's no turning back on it, right? We can't help it. Right? We were born into this imperfect world with a sin issue. And God has the keys right here, and he's saying, "No, son, like I took care of that. Just come follow me and make me Lord of your life." And we work here. We do this every single day and we still fall short.
Yeah.
And to know that, hey, your pastor still deals with this. Hey, your worship leader still deals with this. Hey, your friend still deals with this. Your good, grew up in church Christian mother still deals with this. And it's a hard concept to grasp, because we like to think we're so much better and bigger than the sin issue, when in reality, sin isn't just a list of bad things, but it's just everything that separates us from the fullness of God. And here we have a father who's saying, "No, son, give it to me.
Yeah.
Let me take the burden on. Depend on me, and I'll get rid of this issue for you."
Yeah.
But so many times, head down, drive in the lane. I can deal with this on my own, God. And we don't realize the gravity and the separation that it puts in between us and Jesus.
I'm not a sports guy, but isn't it in basketball, when you put your head down and drive, where fouls happen?
A lot of times, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times, dudes don't want to foul you far away, because you're not going to shoot a shot from the other side of the court unless there's like 2 seconds left and it's just a lob for fun usually, and it's usually not going to go in. But once you're close to the basket, that's where it's valuable. That's where the ball is real valuable, because that's where it's easier to score.
And so the following the analogy, because I'm not a sports guy, but it's when we find ourselves kind of head down driving and not depending on God but doing our own thing, that we can find ourselves fouling and sinning in those things. Like I had a professor in one of my college classes. We traveled a lot for class, and we were actually in Chicago, and he said we were getting ready to leave after the first day. He's like, "All right." He said, "There's mostly guys in the room. I think we had one female in our class, and at the time." And he said, "Let me just say something to you guys." He's like, "You're far away from your family. You're stressed out about school. There's a lot going on. You just found out you have a 40-page paper that's due by the end of the semester. And by the way, like that 40 pages is a long paper." And he was like, "So you're probably stressed. You're probably missing your family. Like that adds a level of stress." He said, "I've found, as somebody who travels a lot, I find myself tempted more to sin than on a regular basis." And so, like he said, just put your guard up, right? Don't foul here, right? It matters, right? we're doing this, and if you foul here, you might foul yourself out of the game, and that's a problem because we need you. And so, like, why he didn't use those same words, it's the concept. And so, it's when we find ourselves head down driving as hard as we can, and there's not space, we haven't learned how to depend on God, but we're living independent of him, we find ourselves fouling. We don't forgive as quickly. We hold grudges. Pride seeps in. Gossip, man, it's so easy when you're bored or like when you're just going through life to just throw out gossip and not think about it. But it's still a sin. Like, this is a real struggle for people. We find ourselves driving, thinking, how can I do any more? That's when we begin to think, well, where's God in all this? Right? Our pride begins to just kind of seep in. And we begin to think, I don't know that I even need him. Right? He hasn't done anything for me in this. And so I would say the challenge here is that when you find yourself in those positions, create the space. Create the space and lean back on what Jesus called us to. That blessed life requires that we are poor in spirit. It requires that we mourn over sin. Right? It ought to break our hearts. And I alluded to this on Sunday, but if you can just sin and be like, oh well, that's a problem, right? Yes, God's going to forgive you, and I believe that wholeheartedly, but it can't just be that I sin because God will forgive me, right? It needs to change. Repentance means turning away from and going back to God, not just doing my own thing. And so these Beatitudes, these blessed attitudes, these things that Jesus is giving out in the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, they match up with things he's going to talk about all through the Sermon on the Mount. In this case, it was worry, it was loving your enemies. We didn't get to much of that on Sunday, but you look at this living dependent on God and mourning people's sins and living this style of life, so that others can look at it and say, man, I want what they've got. Not I want to be them, right? I want to know this God that they depend on because he's an incredible God.
Yeah, and if we would just depend on him, that opens up the door to so many more conversations and so many more people getting introduced, not to Joshua, not to Pastor Joshua, but to their creator.
Yeah.
To the perfect Father that's going to meet all of their needs, because we're going to fall short.
Oh, every time.
We're going to mess up. And no matter how good you think Pastor Joshua is good at preaching, or how much he's a nerd, or how much he knows the word, or this or that, he's going to fall short because he's not Jesus.
Yeah.
And the same could be said about anyone.
Yeah.
It could be said about me. It could be said about my grandma, who is the most perfect Christian there is in my eyes. It could be said about literally anyone. And to know that we're all going to fall short.
Yeah.
And that's sad. But we also have a God that's saying, like, it's okay. You don't have to live like this anymore.
Right.
And he's going to say, it's okay, son, get up and come back to me. And not so that you could turn around and do it again and again and again and again, but so that you could walk in a fuller life and you could see things in a different way, and you could have those conversations with other people and say, hey, I walked through this, but you don't have to.
Right.
Because I learned from this. I learned this, and this is where I went wrong.
Yeah.
This is where you can do right. And, the word says it's by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimonies. And if we would just depend on God more.
Yeah.
Right? It's such a simple thing. Not go to church more, not read our Bible more, not worship more, all those great things that we should do.
Right.
But if we would just depend on him.
Yeah.
And know that he is Lord over our finances, over our career, over our families, over our tough conversations we have to have with people we don't like, over everything. And we would just put our complete trust in him because he's been faithful through it all.
It's good.
It'd be so easy. And it is that easy. And it doesn't feel like it. And that's the biggest frustration I have with this series, is it's all so simple and so practical. And I feel like, man, God, it really isn't that easy, is it? I guess it kind of is. So I just want to leave you with that challenge and know that, there is a sin issue, not just in our lives personally, not just in our nation, not just in our state or our community, but all across the world, because we were born into it.
Yeah.
Right? We walked into a fallen world, and there's no getting that back, right? Sin already entered the world, and there's nothing we can do about that, but there is something we can do in response to it.
It's good.
And then we can turn our eyes to Jesus through it all and depend on him and lead other people to him just by living the way he's called us to do. And even if I never had another conversation with anyone, if I was mute and I couldn't speak to anyone, but I lived the life that Jesus called me to live,
let him see it.
And they could see that, man, what a testimony.
It's good.
Without even words to say. So I just want to encourage you. I want to challenge you, man. Make Jesus Lord of your life and watch how it transforms you from the inside out. Watch how your conversations become different. Watch how the things you used to do aren't the same as they were before. Watch as your friendships and your marriage is strengthened. Watch as all these things come together, not because of anything we did, not because we put our head down and we drove to the lane, but because we looked up and we looked at a God who provides all of our needs. So I just want to leave you with that. I want to encourage you, man. There's so much always going on here. November is coming up really 2 days from now from when this releases. So, man, this year is flying by. Christmas is coming. A lot of fun things are happening at Christmas. And, man, there's so much. You just don't want to miss out on what the Lord is doing here. And we know we love it when you guys get to be a part of it because we couldn't do it alone.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely.
We don't have enough hands or feet or smiles or enough of the giftings that a lot of other people have that we really need to pull all of this off. And, man, it's such a great time to be a part of this family, to be a part of this community. So thanks for watching. And as always, we love you, and we can't wait to see you again soon.